let's switch to that.
That's all right.
I'll say this for him, he's consistent.
Well, he's been so consistent all year.
Not the taste, consistency.
Consistently, yes.
Consistency! Thanks, losers.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Consistency Show. We're going to talk wide receivers this week, and we're going to give out some awards to those wide receivers. Most of these awards will be on a good basis and a positive basis, but some of them, probably not so much. So we welcome back, as usual, my co-star and all the way from Florida, Mr. Ron Rigney. Ron, how's it going, man?
What's up, man? Another mid-80s day here in Florida. No clouds, all good, no rain, so we'll take it.
We are having a nice little run here for the next, I think it's 4 or 5 days. Today was 45 and sunny, which is balmy in February for us. Yeah. But tomorrow is 60 and 71 on Tuesday and 65 on Wednesday. And then I think it goes back to 45 on Thursday and 55 on Friday. So pretty balmy week here for the last week in February in Ohio, and I am not complaining one bit. So to us, that's 80 at this point of the year. So we're excited for that. So once again, we're here to pass out some awards, some fantasy football consistency awards. We do this every year, and we are doing it for the wide receivers. And basically what this is all about is just kind of giving out some kudos to the guys that helped your team with a consistent scenario and helping your team be consistent. If you're a follower of us, you know what some of the players we were promoting all year, and some of them worked out very well, i.e. Todd Gurley. Some did not, and we'll get to that right off the bat. So we're going to start on a bad note, which I know you're not supposed to do, but we're going to do anyway. We're going to go to the worst value award, and this is the wide receiver who had the highest ADP at the beginning of the season, and yet ended the season with the worst combination of total fantasy points and consistency, thus making him the worst value of 2017. And Ron, I'll let you start with a nomination for worst value of the year.
Well, I'm gonna cheat here because, as always, I know who the winner is going to be. I've seen the envelope before it gets handed to the presenters, so I'm going to pick on a couple of guys with the same last name here. So I'm going to give you kind of a twofer, and that's Dez Bryant, our number 42 or 41, I should say, consistency guy. And then you scroll down the list a little bit. I'm going to go Martavis Bryant as our 61st consistency guy as well. And I'll start with Martavis Bryant towards the bottom there, 33%. Clutch rating, 5 out of 15 clutch games. And he was going as the 20th wideout off the board and just kind of seemed to disappear. He's not a guy that I was real big on in the first place. When you've got a guy, you kind of follows that same – wasn't out as long as Josh Gordon, but had those drug-related suspensions, hadn't seen the field in a while. You got to have your question marks. And so he definitely did not live up to the hype at all. Definitely was not in on him in the preseason. So he's a guy that I'm going to start with. But I think Dez Bryant was a bigger disappointment just kind of based upon – where people were taking him and where the ADP was at. And so when you look at his ADP, and there's a lot of things you can kind of contribute or attribute to his season too. He was the 7th wideout off the board, finished 23rd in total points, but he was like I said, he was our 42nd most consistent guy as far as our clutch rankings. And so he's a guy that seems to be tailing off a little bit. In 2017, he did play all 16 games, so he wasn't, he was durable. But overall, 69 catches, 838 yards, 6 touchdowns. If you're taking him at ADP 7, and as a top 20 overall fantasy player, he's a guy that you're going to have to get more out of than that. And that's kind of the second straight season that we've seen a dip in that production since he had the injury season in 2015. And then before that, the big seasons with double-digit touchdowns and over 1,200 yards and nearly 100 catches. So he's a guy that if you took him at, as a 7th wideout off the board, you had to be a little bit disappointed with what you got out of him. But so, like I said, I'm going to pick on these two Bryant boys out of the gate here for our first negative award that we're going to hand out.
Right. I totally agree with Dez. I think the thing that was more disappointing about Dez this year or a couple things. One, the fact that he was this bad and he played all season. Like you said, a couple years ago when he was injured and he wasn't himself, you kind of gave him a free pass. Like, okay, Dez, you had a rough year. You weren't 100% healthy, but he didn't seem to have any, bad health. But even more importantly, there were 6 games without Ezekiel Elliott. This is where Dez Bryant should have succeeded greatly. I mean, there should have been 6 straight clutch games for him because he should have been getting the ball all the time. And I think during that stretch, I think he was 3 for 6 or maybe even 2 for 6. So that is not what you expect out of Dez Bryant. I have to believe his ADP is going to be reflective of that this coming year. But I tell you what, he's going to have to be way down in the draft for me to pick him. He used to be a guy that I really liked, and I really liked his consistency. But I think Dez is about done.
Well, and he's a guy too that I looked at. I looked at where he was at consistency wise, and I looked at where he was at stat wise, and I was thinking before I even looked at games played, I'm like, oh, he had to, because I didn't really have him anywhere.
Right, I didn't either.
Pay a whole lot of attention, and you look, and he played 16 games, and he put up those mediocre numbers. And you mentioned that stretch without Zeke too, and I know Colby and I do the consistently cashing over at BGFS as well. And I know there's a couple weeks that I went with Dez as one of my wideouts just because of the price point he was at, but also for that reason. I mean, he was kind of the guy left there by default, and it ended up kind of biting me a couple weeks. So it didn't really work out the way it was supposed to.
No, exactly. And I like I said, he's going to have to be really way down the draft for me. I haven't looked at any early ADPs. I mean, it's only February, but I have to believe he's going to be 5th round, 6th round. And I'm not even sure. I mean, I guess I'd take him as my wide receiver 3. I don't know. I mean, he was 23rd in total points, so at least his total points was in, wide receiver 2 category. But when you're 40th at, or 41 at 50% consistency, I mean, he's down there with guys like Jermaine Kearse and Paul Richardson. I mean, that is not the Dez Bryant we know and love. So, like I said, he's going to have to be way down there for me to take a chance on him. Well, I don't know if he'll fall that far because of the name itself. Somebody will take him in the 4th round.
When you got Ted Ginn being more consistent than you are, there's something going wrong.
There's a problem. Yes, exactly. Or Sammy Watkins being more consistent. That right there, I think, is crushing in itself.
Yeah.
Well, one of the guys I'm going to nominate is Amari Cooper. I mean, he's also down there in that 50% range, and he was number 10 wide receiver or number 9 wide receiver ADP wise, right behind Dez Bryant, and pretty much had a similar year. Missed 2 games, so yes, he did have some injuries, and obviously we know Carr wasn't 100% and blah blah blah. But this is the 2nd year in a row for Cooper not playing at his potential. Now, I don't draft him, and if you read the book and you were a follower of the Consistency Guide and Big Guy Fantasy Sports, you know that I've always told people to draft Michael Crabtree before you draft Cooper. And Crabtree was certainly better again this year. Wasn't great, but he was certainly better at 64% than Cooper at 50%. But definitely not didn't pull his own. It was definitely a very poor value at the end of the year. So I'll let you nominate our winner, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Well, I kind of gave you a little bonus too for there from the beginning here, but our guy is none other than Mr. Jordy Nelson.
Yeah.
And you look at just where he came from, and I think he's one of the biggest question marks heading into the season, just as far as he did come back at the end of the season last year and didn't do a whole heck of a lot with it. He's another guy too. I wasn't sure what to expect out of him at all, but he's our 61st most consistent, 33% clutch rate. And he played 15 games as well, and only was clutch in 5 of those, and 46th in total points. Overall, just a huge disappointment because he was a 1st round pick if you were in a deep enough draft, 5th wide out on the board, 11th guy overall off the board as well as far as just across positions. So definitely a guy that, when you look at this ADP from 2017 and you look at these top 10 guys, he's by far the first name you come across. And when you cross-reference it with what we do over on the consistency side, you got to scroll pretty far down to get him. That was another thing. I was trying to find him on there, and I kept thinking I was passing him up because he's so far down on the list, and I finally found him there. I guess he's at 60, not 61, so you give him credit there. But nonetheless, when you're at that spot, it doesn't really matter. So
no.
Interesting to see what happens with him going into next season, though.
Yeah, I love Jordy. I had Jordy in a number of leagues because I love Jordy. Jordy's always Mr. Consistency. 2016, he was the number one most consistent wide receiver for the year. So obviously he was one of my favorite picks, and late first round, early second round, Jordy was just a given for me. I didn't even have to think if I saw Jordy there. Here's the weird part is that the first 7 games of the year with him and Rodgers, or the first 6 games of the year with him and Rodgers together, he earned 5 out of 6 clutch games. So he was being Jordy Nelson that we know and love. After Rodgers goes down and Brent Hundley comes in, and we don't know what, if they call, if Jordy Nelson, had some, or Brent Hundley had some pictures with him with farm animals. I don't know what happened, but obviously Brent Hundley had no intention of throwing Jordy Nelson the ball during the games. I mean, most games was 2 for 24, 3 for 30. I mean, it was nothing. And so, we kind of wrote it off. Then Aaron Rodgers came back for 1 game, but he didn't catch any more passes. He kind of went 3 for 36 or 4 for 50 or whatever it was. So that's what scared me was that 1 game. But on the other hand, the first 6 games, he was Jordy Nelson that we know and love. So I'm going to probably at this point see where he falls out ADP-wise. My thought is he's going to be way down. I'm really hoping everybody gives up on him, and I'm going to take Jordy Nelson as my wide receiver 3. Here's what I think is going to happen. Jordy Nelson, I think, has lost a step. I think that's obvious. But what Jordy Nelson does well is there's that ESP between him and Aaron Rodgers when he starts running around or when he gets close to the end zone. Jordy Nelson doesn't have to do anything fantastic for Aaron Rodgers to keep looking at him near the goal line. I think Nelson will be a good wide receiver 3 because I think he'll get, the 6 catches for 50, 60 yards and a touchdown, which is 16, 17 points, which is perfectly fine in a PPR format. Mm-hmm. I don't think he's going to ever get back to the days of 10 catches, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He doesn't have that speed anymore. That's where Devontae Adams comes into play. I think Randall Cobb will be the odd man out because I just think there's too much camaraderie, too much history with Rodgers and Nelson. I'm really hoping that Nelson will be way down, and I think I will take a chance on him as my wide receiver 3. I won't pick him sooner than that, just because I just don't want to take that chance. But I think he's a good risk if you're going to take a risk. If I got to take a chance between, Nelson Aguilar and Jordy Nelson as my wide receiver 3, a lot of people will say, well, Aguilar's the up-and-comer. He's on his way up, and Nelson's on his way down. You're right, but who are we going to trust more on the field on a given week-to-week basis? I think Jordy Nelson can still be counted on as long as that still is, he's healthy and Rodgers is healthy. That's the only love I'm going to give him. It's not a lot, but it's more than I think a lot of people will give, and I'm not going to give up on him. I'm going to give him one more shot, but at the right value.
And you kind of alluded to it too. One of the things from a real life standpoint that, not that Aaron Rodgers is not fun to watch anyway because he's one of the best that does it, but they're 2 of the best guys that I've seen as far as Jordy Nelson running a route, and all he has to do is turn his head and the ball is right there.
Right.
Whether he's running an out,
right, exactly. Yeah.
Hook, whatever it may be, a drag, the ball is right where it needs to be, and that speaks to Aaron Rodgers' talent, at his quarterback, but also that speaks to Jordy Nelson's talent as far as being able to run the routes and them both being on the same page. And not to say that there's not a lot of wide receiver quarterback combinations that can do that, but those 2 guys are 2 of the best that do it right now, and it's a lot of fun to watch.
Right. No, I agree. In fact, I'm looking at some potential early, like you said, early scenarios. And right now, Jordy's at round 4, about 405. Let's see, what wide receiver is he going to be? He is wide receiver 19. We'll see. We'll just have to see what happens in the preseason and that. It'll be interesting. I mean, again, if I'm loaded at other positions, that's probably a safer pick than somebody else. But we'll see how it all plays out. That's kind of the early thought in that. But so our worst value goes to Jordy, but let's hope that Jordy is going to have better days coming into 2017 or 2018. So we're going to move on to the best value, kind of the opposite of where we were just at. This is the wide receiver had the lowest ADP of the season, but ended the year with the best combination of total fantasy points and consistency, thus making him the best value in 17. And I think a lot of people are going to be shocked by the winner, so I'll let you throw out the first nomination, and we'll take it from there.
All right, guy that I'm going to nominate, and we talk every episode about, how consistency absolutely just loves rookies to death. No, it doesn't. It hates them. But I'm going to look at Cooper Kupp here, and Cooper Kupp is a guy that, even in the rookie class, I'm using the Fantasy Pros ADP from last season. You had Zay Jones with a higher ADP than Cooper Kupp. So, he's a guy that I think just got put in a great spot, put in a great situation, not a whole heck of a lot of pressure on him. And he came through for the value that you got him at. He was the 49th wideout off the board, 133rd guy overall, finished in our rankings as our 31st most consistent guy, 25th in total points, which isn't huge, but when you're drafting him probably as your wide receiver 6 in some cases, depending on the size of the league, getting a 60% clutch rate, and a guy that played 15 games was clutched 9 of those. That's quite a bit of value for in that offense for what he put up, and I think that's just a whole, that whole offense kind of took a step forward, but he was definitely a big part of that, and he was definitely a guy that, we alluded to the consistently cashing article a couple minutes ago, and he's a guy that I went with, a few weeks in there too for the price point and what you got. He scored you 5 touchdowns, caught you 62 balls, 869 yards. Overall, had a really nice season for where you were able to get him at. Like I said, is maybe your wide receiver 6 at some point.
Yeah, no, and even more important, and I'm assuming this will also be kind of why I'll probably have him ranked as undervalued, is not only did he have the 9 clutch games, but 6 out of those 9 came over the last 8 games. So realistically, over the last half of the season, he was 75% consistent. You put that number, if he pulls that number off for an entire year, he's up with the A.J. Green, Odell Beckham scenarios. So he could be nicely undervalued, could be a great pick, but no, definitely a great nomination there. I'm going to throw out a nomination that may surprise some folks, and that's Marvin Jones. I mean, Marvin Jones, the year before he came to Detroit 2 years ago from Cincinnati. I really liked him coming into that year because I thought he was a good talent that could be a nice wide receiver 2 on the other side of Golden Tate. He started off like wildfire that year. But then he kind of dozed off, and then he ended up about 50% for the year. So, but I'm like, man, he just seemed to have some potential there. But, his range last year, ADP-wise, was like wide receiver 45. So he's really kind of outside of the starting lineups. But I drafted him in a lot of leagues at wide receiver 4 or 5 and really liked him because I thought he could at least have wide receiver 3 value. Well, he did even better than that. He ended the year 11th overall in total points. 11th. Wide receiver 1. Consistency 69%, which ranked him 14th, just outside of the wide receiver 1 consistency ranks. But he was tied with Demaryius Thomas. He was ahead of Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Crabtree, Thielen. He had a better consistency rating than those folks. So I think he was a really, really great value in 2017.
Agreed.
Any more recommendations?
I'll throw another guy out here, and he wasn't, I don't think, as huge a value as Cooper Kupp was, but he's definitely a guy that you were able to get a little bit later, and I think he really busted on the scene, and I think his days of being a value in the draft are over, and that's Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen was the 40th wideout off the board. He ended up on our rankings ranking him at, I just lost my spot here. He was 24th on our rankings, 10 of 16 as far as clutch games out, 63%. Top 10 in total points. So put all those things together, and like Adam Thielen was a guy that I was kind of on in 2016 towards the end, and I thought, he might be one of those kind of shifty PPR guys that you might put at your flex, and all of a sudden he ended up being, a wide receiver 2 most weeks, even had a couple wide receiver 1 games, and so he was definitely a guy that if you took him with that 40th wide receiver overall value, you definitely got some solid upside there. And I think that, like I said, it's not definitely that he's not going to be a well kept secret going into drafts next year. I think that he might be another guy that could be a little bit overhyped, but overall, what they do with Case Keenum is going to affect him as well. But he's definitely a guy that was a solid value and kind of like, I don't think to the extent that Marvin Jones was, but where you were able to get him, he definitely outplayed his draft spot.
Yeah, I think the only thing that was, and I loved Thielen. I had Thielen on a lot of teams because of his end of 2016. He was showing some consistency there with Bradford, and obviously we didn't know about the Thielen thing, or not the Thielen thing, about Casey Keenum, but Casey Keenum kind of became Sam Bradford 2.0 and was very good in moving the ball around and using his targets. I think the more disappointing thing was Thielen ending the year 8th in total points, but only 24th in consistency. Because that, I think, like you said, is going to cause his value to be a little high. I'm looking at ADP right now, and it's got him as the 12th wide receiver off the board. That might be a little high for me. Again, because with Diggs there, there's just they kind of feast off each other, and I think they'll both be around. They're both around that 60-65%, which is great. But I don't know if I can pick him that high when there's guys going after him like Jarvis Landry and Jordy Nelson and Fitzgerald and Golden Tate and Demaryius Thomas. Especially if Demaryius Thomas gets a real quarterback. I don't know if Thielen is worth that high going into this year. Like you said, he might be a little overvalued. We'll have to see how that all plays out. But our winner is Marvin Jones, though, because of his 11th ranking overall in total points and 69% consistency. So congratulations to Marvin for that. We'll be sending out his award shortly. Let's go to our Rookie of the Year. I think we've already mentioned at least one nomination. So I'll just start with that one. And I think Cooper Kupp certainly certainly gets a nomination here, like you said. 25th in total points, 60% consistency. Certainly was down there when it comes to where he was looked at as a positive factor going into drafts. I just finished the rookies versus consistency article that's on Big Guy Fantasy Sports now, and Cooper was one of the 2 wide receivers that had over 60% in his rookie season, therefore earning a spot in the quote Rookie Hall of Fame. He's right up there with guys like Julio Jones, Odell Beckham that also had that in their opening year in their rookie season. So, a nice season. But the funny thing is, he was drafted in, I think, the 4th round, and the other gentleman who I assume you're going to bring up was drafted in the 3rd round. So the first and second round picks at wide receivers didn't earn that consistency. Most of them were hurt or just didn't play well. But yeah, Cooper Kupp was certainly very viable and had a nice season. So, Ron, I'll let you announce the next nominee and our winner.
Okay, so the guy, hands down, I don't think there's much of a contest here as far as rookies and as far as who's going to be your most consistent guy off the board here. It's got to be Juju Smith-Schuster. As we talked about with him, 60% clutch rating, almost unheard of for rookies. And like you said, it puts him up there towards our consistency rookie Hall of Fame there, which is probably a pretty small place, I would imagine. In that regard, probably not a lot of busts in there of guys. Just overall, was able to perform consistently the whole year. When he's 20th on our list, decent wide receiver 2 value heading into next year. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of happens with that offense, because I trust Big Ben a little bit less as the years go on, and he's kind of showing some of the mileage and some of the age, and just overall, like I said, you can't really count on some places that you can count on rookies as far as fantasy football, and wide receivers definitely not one of them. But he was able to kind of buck that trend a little bit. 21st in total points, 64% clutch is like I alluded to, 9 out of 14 times, and so overall, I think he's the runaway winner, no doubt.
Yeah, no doubt. Like you said, looking into 2018, I think there's obviously going to be a lot of things. One, does Le'Veon Bell stay in Pittsburgh? Because that's going to be huge. Because if he leaves, then they've got to figure out a replacement for him to take off the pressure, because if they don't have a good running game, Big Ben's going to get killed. Then it's really the Martavis Bryant issue. Is he going to play? Is he going to have his head screwed on right? Because, the second half of the season for Juju, he only had 3 out of I think 7 out of his last 7 games. Bryant came back then and was playing. I don't think he was having a huge impact, but Schuster did have 3 straight at the end of the year, weeks 15, 16, 17. Nice end of the year, but he had a much better start. Again, when Bryant came back, it kind of tailed into it a little bit, so we just kind of have to wait and see. I like Schuster. I think he's a talented player, but I'm a little worried about it from a fantasy standpoint, just because of the other people there, like Bryant. If they let go of Bryant, or they trade him away or do something with him, then obviously Schuster takes that number 2 role overall. Then fine, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see, what happens in the offseason with that. So we're going to move on to the kind of another bad award. This is the Clutch Less Award. For those of you who maybe had a wide receiver that at the end of the year had a high ranking in total fantasy points, and you couldn't understand why they didn't seem to be really helping your team, it's probably because their consistency was lower than expected. So therefore that makes him look a little more valuable due to the high points rank, but was really not worth as much to the fantasy teams. And Ron, I'm going to let you start off with our first nomination.
Yeah, a guy I'm going to throw out here, and he's somebody that you're not taking, as your wide receiver 1 by any stretch of the imagination. You're not taking him to kind of turn your season around. But I'm going to throw out there Robbie Anderson. And Robbie Anderson, to me, is kind of he's the anti-consistency guy. Top 20 total points, he was 18th, but overall just a 56% clutch rate. And, he's one of those guys that he does pretty much one thing well, and that's run down the field really fast and catch a long pass or catch a touchdown. And so, when you look at what he does, it's kind of a one-trick pony. He was the 50th wideout off the board, picked 141 overall. And I mean, he did have some weeks where he came up huge if you were able to get him later on. But overall, it's deceiving, because that's kind of the name of the game with the consistency rankings, is when you look at if you read the guide and you read the beginning of the guide, especially, it kind of breaks down that you might have all these guys that are great at getting total points, but at the end of the season you're barely making the playoffs, and so you're kind of wondering what went wrong. Well, he's kind of a example of what goes wrong. You're looking at these guys that they score a lot of points, but they're not doing it consistently every week. I mean, when you look at the body of work, he played you 16 games, he caught you 63 balls, 941 yards, and 7 scores. Looks pretty awesome for you get him, but the thing is, he didn't do it every week, week in and week out, as far as consistent with the points. And now you're not expecting those huge weeks every week, but you're expecting consistency based upon where you get him. So he's definitely a guy that is not what we're looking for here with our consistency guy, that's for sure.
Right, and then he had the off-season problems already, and so we'll see if that has what effect that has on any potential suspensions. So definitely going kind of knucklehead on the players, and going to see how that affects him from a fantasy standpoint and playing standpoint heading into the year. One I'm going to throw out there is T.Y. Hilton. First off, T.Y. Hilton had a terrible year. A lot of it has to do with, of course, the fact that Andrew Luck did not play, and I totally get that. But I don't care. If you're a top receiver, you still perform well. I mean, you still have to go out there and be the best player that you can be. I mean, Demaryius Thomas had garbage at quarterback all year and still ended 16th in total points and still had a almost 70% consistency and was 15th in overall in that. I mean, yeah, I get it. I mean, let's be honest. DeAndre Hopkins didn't have very good quarterbacks for most of his year, and he was number 1 and 100% consistent. So, T.Y. Hilton can say what he wants about being a top player and being paid like a top player, but he did not do it, and he was 27th in total points, which doesn't look bad. I mean, it's just an outside wide receiver too. Obviously, that's not where he was probably drafted, but his consistency was only 31%, and that puts him down in guys like Corey Coleman, Tyler Lockett. I mean, that's just not good company to be in. So he's my nominee for the clutch list. You got any more out there?
The only other one I would throw out is, it's another guy that's kind of a one-trick pony like Robbie Anderson, but it seems like he goes for more weeks at a time disappearing, and that's Kenny Stills. Kenny Stills is a guy that was down there. He's actually 26th in total points, which I kind of had to do a double take. I never would have expected him to be even sniffing the top 25 in points at wide receiver down there in Miami, but he was our 51st consistent guy off the board, 44% clutch rate. And so, I mean, you're not, once again, drafting him to turn your team around and turn your season around. He's more of a kind of a, probably if you're drafted, well, I hope you're not drafting him, but if you are, hopefully you're, getting him extremely late. But he's a guy that does one thing, and he's a deep ball threat, and that's pretty much it. And he came through a couple weeks, if you used him in daily or you needed him as a bye week fill-in or an injury fill-in, he probably paid dividends a couple of weeks. But overall, he's a guy that, you look at that almost top 25 total points, but all the way down at number 51. So he definitely is another solid nominee for this award, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting in Miami. It really looks like Jarvis Landry is not going to be a Dolphin. But, I mean, I've also heard that they are certainly going to try hard to keep him and pay him what he's worth, and I certainly hope they do, because I think there's a good spot for him. Him and Tannehill certainly click pretty well, but he's definitely looking for the big payday, which, again, he deserves. So we'll see, because if he does leave, now you're left with Devontae Parker and Kenny Stills. Stills may all of a sudden have a little bit of value there unless they get another wide receiver to add to the mix to help out in Miami, but we'll just have to wait and see for that. But our winner is T.Y. Hilton, as we mentioned before, 27th in total points, but only 31% clutch rate, just not good enough. Obviously, a lot is going to depend on Andrew Luck being 100% healthy. I don't know if he's still throwing. I don't think I've seen it yet. But Frank Reich will be there to help him along, so we'll see how that all goes. But T.Y. Hilton is our winner. So we're going to flip over to the positive side of the clutch, and that's called the Clutch More, and that is going to the wide receiver who ended the season with a low ranking in total fantasy points, but his consistency was higher than expected, therefore making him look a little less value due to the high points rank, or the points rank not being as high, and might be worth a little bit more, and might be a little bit more value heading into this year. So, Ron, I'll let you start off with the nominations.
Well, a guy that I kind of saw that I expected a little more out of this season that kind of fits this category, and he's not real far down the list, but Doug Baldwin is a guy that I thought would be a little bit better as far as when you look at who we're comparing him here with the award winner, I guess, that we'll talk about here in a second. Doug Baldwin's a guy that finished 14th in total points. He was 12th in consistency, not bad. I'd like to have seen him a little bit higher than that, and I thought he would have been a little bit higher up the way. 75%, nothing to sneeze at. So I'm kind of nitpicking here a little bit, I guess. But I'm looking for some guys here that kind of rank around our winner here. Doug Baldwin's a guy that I think he would, based on ADP, based on where he went last year, I think he would have performed a little bit better than where he did. So I'll throw him out there as overall. But like I said, 75% still not bad, but I'm kind of picking on him a little bit here, I guess.
And you can, because to be honest with you, this is the first time he's been over, I think, 65% in his career. He was always right up there with my next nominee, which is Mike Evans, as the guys who always scored a lot of points but weren't consistent. And actually, Baldwin, just like I said, his 75% is by far his best consistency. He might actually be a guy I kind of like going into this year, because there is starting to be some consistency with, Russell Wilson and him on offense. I thought they were going to go a little bit more to spread it around between, and Jimmy Graham did benefit quite a bit with Paul Richardson and those kind of folks. But, it seemed like Baldwin was always getting the catches, especially in a PPR. So not a bad nomination. That's certainly right up there. But as I mentioned, my nominee is Mike Evans, who is normally my poster boy for inconsistency due to him never seeming to earn a clutch. He's never had a clutch rate over 70% in his career. But last year he was being drafted as like the third or fourth wide receiver in the overall in the first round. And for good reason, because the year before, he was third in total points. So everybody said, oh, third in total points, then he must be the third best receiver. Well, problem was his consistency was under 70%. And I told people he's just not worth being a first-round pick. And people were burned, and they certainly, because of his 17th overall, ranking in total points, he did miss one game because of that. That helped, probably hurt a little bit there. But still, 17th certainly made him look really bad to a lot of people. And he did have some bad weeks. I think he had a couple weeks. I know he had at least 1 0 week, I think. And he had a couple in single digits. But 17th in total points. But here's the thing. His consistency was 80%. By far his best year ever. And the games that he missed, the 4 that he missed, was when Jameis Winston wasn't playing. So if Winston would have played all year, he might have had even better consistency numbers. So that actually puts Mike Evans, believe it or not, on my radar next year value-wise, because I can see him probably falling into the second or third round as wide receiver to be drafted. And if I could get a couple stud running backs and get Evans and, follow up that with maybe some, guys like Demaryius Thomas or Cooks or, people like that I could get some good consistency to match along with it, I think that he might be actually a decent value heading into next year. Any more recommendations or nominations on your side?
No, I just want to just talk a little bit about Mike Evans too, and because I have him in a couple of dynasties, and it's one of those things that I look at him as having a very similar season to Michael Thomas, where Michael Thomas, a lot of people took him very early and expected these huge 100-yard games out of him, multiple touchdown weeks, and you look at what he was able to put up, and it still was a solid season, but it just didn't kind of seem like it at the time, and I think Mike Evans is kind of that same way, because you have a guy that's known for big plays, and he makes these jump ball catches and just a huge, just big body receiver. But he didn't have those big games that jumped off the page at you stat wise. But he was getting you those consistent points week after week after week, and it was one of those things that I think that it was either on I think it was on XM Radio. You had people calling in at one point. I'm wondering if I should drop Mike Evans for such and such on waivers this week because
Right.
Evans hasn't been doing anything, and it's like I own him, and I'm like, no, he hasn't been 130 yards and 3 scores every week, but he's been pretty damn solid most weeks. And you turn out and you look at the consistency rating at the end, and it's 80%. That's not all bad. It's maybe not total points first round value, but definitely up there when you're looking at it from a consistency standpoint. You could do a lot worse than Mike Evans.
Yeah, and I still say that this past year, and maybe it's because the running backs all were so huge this year, and I think I mentioned this before. If I didn't, I'm going to bring it up again, is the early ADPs are flushing out where the first round are 9 running backs and 3 receivers. The only 3 receivers in the ADP that I'm looking at, this is PPR format, and the only 3 receivers that are being drafted in the first round are Antonio Brown at 6, Hopkins at 7, and Beckham at 10. That's it. So all of a sudden now, we have this, everybody's in on running backs. So guys like, but the thing I saw today on Twitter, and I don't remember who it was, or it doesn't matter, but it was something about retweet if you had a disappointing players on your team last year, like Julio Jones and Mike Evans. And I'm like, Julio Jones, 81% consistency. Mike Evans, 80% consistency. Wow. What do you want out of these guys? You know? I mean, Julio Jones in 2016 had a 64% consistency rating. That year, I could have understood if you said, I was really pissed off to have Julio Jones. Last year was not, but yet this is what I'm seeing. And I heard the same thing all year about the disappointment in Julio Jones, disappointment in A.J. Green, disappointment in Mike Evans. And I'm like, all of those guys are 75% or higher. What are you expecting out of these players? So, if that's the thing, okay, fine. Then, obviously we all have to jump on the running back wagon. But, man, there is going to be such a great run of wide receivers in round 2. In fact, I'm looking at the round 2 ADP, and it'll flip-flop in round 2. There are 9 wide receivers to be drafted and 3 running backs. So Julio Jones, Thomas, Allen, Green, Evans, Hill, and Devontae Adams, which might be a little high for me. at the end of the second round. But that's in the second round, and it's a flip flop of 9 receivers and only 3 running backs. So it's going to be an interesting. We'll see how this all plays out when it gets to reality come August. But man, it's interesting to see the flip flop. But so as we mentioned, Mike Evans is our winner, and like I said, 80% clutch rate. Even though he was 17th in total points, the 4 bad games were when Winston was not the quarterback, or the 4 non-clutch games was when he wasn't the quarterback. So I have to believe that Evans is a good value going into next year. Like I said, right here, he's sitting at 209. I don't have a problem with that. I'd like to get him later. I'm hoping that maybe he falls a little farther. We'll see, but I'm perfectly fine with that heading into this year. So. Mike Evans with our clutch more. So now we're going to go to our clutch comeback player of the year. This is obviously the wide receiver who, had a pretty poor 2016, but then came back with a much, much stronger 2017. And Ron, I'm going to let you start off with the nominations.
Well, it's another one that the winner is hands down the guy that you're going to give this award to, no matter who you nominate. But guy that I'm going to nominate that I definitely like him every year, and I hope for his health every year that he's going to produce, because when he's in the lineup, he's the guy that's going to get the catches. He's the guy that the QB is looking for, and that's Keenan Allen. When you look at Keenan Allen, he was 15th wideout off the board. He was 37th player overall. When he's healthy, he's getting the catches. So he's PPR gold if you play in that format, and even in standard league last year. You get him. You get 16 games worth of production from him. When you look at 2015, 2016, you combine those two, he played 9 games. Now, in the 8 games that he played in 2015, he still had 67 catches, still had 725 yards and 4 scores. That's pretty solid half-season numbers. You multiply that all by 2, that's on pace for getting close to breaking records. When you look at 2017, over 100 grabs, 1,300 yards, just shy of 1,400 yards. Only had 6 touchdowns, which still for a wideout's not bad, but he's a guy that you got at the 15th overall spot, and he was our 4th most consistent wide receiver with an 81% clutch rate. So it comes down to health with him. If you can get him and you can pray that he's going to be healthy and do do some dances or whatever it is that you do to make sure he's in there. Right. He's the guy that you're getting solid value out of. Now, we talked about a couple of guys too that their performance might help or hurt their value going into next year. I think it might bump him up a little bit, but I don't think he's going to be ultra high. Are you able to see where he's at on that?
Yeah, I am, and that was actually something that I'm surprised by. He is actually ultra high, so he is coming off the board as the 6th wide receiver overall, which surprises me because he usually doesn't get that much love, even in the past. I'm assuming because he had such a monster year that's why he's sitting there. And so, again, he might be a little overvalued but he puts up the numbers. Like you said, that year that he only had the half season, he was 7 of 8 in quality games or clutch games at that point when he went down. And he's not injury prone. This is an argument I got into with one expert, I think it was last year, and they were kind of hitting me with Keenan Allen is injury prone. I said, no, Keenan Allen has bad luck. There's a difference. Jordan Reed is injury prone. He's always injured. He injures himself when he sneezes. This man is always injured. Yeah. Keenan Allen had a lacerated kidney and then I think broke his ankle. I mean, we're talking about bad luck. That's not limping, miss a game here, miss a game there, miss a couple games. That's injury prone. This guy had some bad luck. And he came back last year and proved it was bad luck because when he's on the field and he doesn't have these bad luck situations, he performs and he puts up good, consistent, quality numbers. And like I said, if I'm sitting there, if I have to, basically, like I said, Brown, Hopkins, Beckham, Jones, and Thomas are gone. So you're looking to choose between Allen, Green, Evans, or Tyreek Hill. A.J. Green's certainly probably the guy I'll probably pick. But if A.J. Green goes and then it's me, I'm probably going to pick Allen over Evans because I know what I'm getting out of Allen. Evans certainly showed he can be consistent, but I know I can count on Keenan Allen, and if I'm having that choice, I'm still going Keenan Allen over Mike Evans. So, again, there's just a lot of question marks after those guys because you get into the Tyreek Hill with a rookie quarterback or a second-year quarterback. Devontae Adams, he's had his moments, but I don't know if I could still trust that Jordy Nelson won't be involved. T.Y. Hilton, Adam Thielen, Jarvis Landry, Baldwin, Cooks, Jeffries, Diggs. There's a lot of question marks, and there's a lot of inconsistency there that I don't know if I want to take a chance at that point. So, like I said, Keenan Allen, he's going to be up there, and you're going to have to pay, quote, pay for him to get him because he's going to be a second round pick regardless. So, but a good choice as well. So, I'm going to throw out my nomination and winner, and that is DeAndre Hopkins. And 2 years ago in 2016, he had a nightmare situation in Houston, even worse than 2017. He was just really struggling with the quarterback situation, and that year really, couldn't do much. He had a 56% consistency, 27th in total points. It was just a tough year for him. But this past year, he started out with a half of Tom Savage in the first game. Then Deshaun Watson came in and just set the world on fire for about 5-6 weeks. But then he went down. And a lot of people were really worried that Hopkins was done. He was not going to see the points. He was not going to get the catches. But they threw to him, whether he was open or not. I forget what the number of... I know that his targets per game were way in double digits. And he put up the numbers and was 100% consistent for the year. And obviously the reason why he was the comeback clutch player of the year for 2017. So any thoughts on him and, his comeback and, what to expect, going into 18 if Watson's healthy for the whole year?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things where you would have thought that NFL defenses would have found a way to stop him because there's not a whole hell of a lot after him on that team to throw to, and it didn't happen. And so I don't really see a scenario to where, depending upon who's back there, that they can't recreate that. And if Watson is, healthy from the get-go, I mean, I think it's all gravy. I think it's going to be another huge season, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we have to question in Houston is who will be the running back. I mean, I assume Lamar Miller stays, but there was talk that they may, trade him, they may let him go. I don't know because of Deonta Foreman. Foreman got hurt, so I got to assume Lamar Miller is still going to be the running back. Lamar Miller didn't really have that bad of a year, fantasy-wise, consistency-wise. So my thought is he'll be back there. So, Will Fuller is healthy, and they have the Steven Anderson playing tight end. I don't see any reason why Hopkins won't be right there at the top, and certainly worth the first-round pick that he is. We're not even going to go into nominations because we just know that it's very, very obvious who is our clutch MVP of the year. And Ron, I'll let you make the announcement.
Well, surprise, surprise, it's going to be Josh Gordon. No, I'm just kidding. DeAndre Hopkins, no doubt. I mean, you've got a guy that, in our rankings, what we look at is just doing it in week in, week out every week, and he did that every single game that he played. Hopkins was 15 for 15, didn't matter who was back there, and it looks to me like they got it right at quarterback with the guy that they were able to get in Watson. Looks like he's going to be, based on what he showed last year, he could be a star in the making, and so that looks like an awesome compliment to each other there, and the 311 total points he put up, he was number one there as well. So when you're number one consistency, number one total points, who else are you going to give it to? There's nobody else you can give it to. So he's hands down the winner, across the board, no question, question.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and this is kind of why when we were talking about Deshaun Watson being drafted at the end of the second round. You sit there and go, well, that's the dumbest thing you would ever do. But then you're sitting there going, man, if he put up the numbers in a whole year that he did in those 6 games on a per-game basis, yeah, he's well worth a pick in the end of the second round. But can he do it again? Is, what's the leg going to be like? I mean, I tore an ACL. I came back, but I'm no athlete by any stretch of the imaginations. But, it's still rough. It's still a rough comeback, and I know they're pro athletes and they have the best trainers, but it's going to slow him down a little bit. Maybe that's better for him, so he doesn't run around as much and get hurt. That's always my biggest fear, is that a running quarterback like that who likes to go out and make things happen, it's great, but it also puts puts him at a lot of risk. And my biggest fear would be, drafting somebody like Hopkins or Watson, is the fact that he could get hurt again, and then you're back to, whoever, C.J. Yates or Tom Savage or whoever the case may be. But again, Hopkins put up the numbers regardless. That'll probably continue to happen. He's certainly worth a first-round pick. You could even argue that he might be a better pick than, you might pick him ahead of Antonio Brown, because of Brown, again, not knowing what's going on in Pittsburgh with Bell, and, Brown is starting to get a little bit older, and he's starting to, he had that little injury at the end of the year, missed a couple games. He's getting the time's wearing on him as well, so we'll just have to wait and see how all that plays out. So, as we wrap this up, we just, want to just say thanks to Ron. Ron, thanks for being on. We're going to be doing this every week and putting this out here, and we're going to actually start getting some guests on here as we get a little further into the season. We have some exciting stuff coming up on Big Guy Fantasy Sports. Baseball season is here. We're getting close. The pitchers and catchers just reported here in the last couple of days, if I'm not mistaken, right, Ron?
Yes, sir. It was Valentine's Day for the most part that everybody got there. So, yeah, awesome. Baseball is in the air, my friend.
Yeah, it is. And so Ron will be doing his annual prospects. If you haven't had a chance to read them, he did some of the best prospects in both the AL and NL, and put that out there for you readers who are, and he picked some players that could be on the team this year, could be starters this year, and certainly worth looking at. Ron, you want to maybe throw out a couple seconds there about the articles and what people can get out of them?
Yeah, so I didn't go super deep, because unless some of us dynasty guys, if you listen to the podcast I'm able to do with Van Lee and Nathan Dock, and we're deep into the dynasty leagues. We play in leagues where you have 10, 15 prospects alone on your roster, in addition to your major league roster. So you've got, in some of those leagues, 300 prospects that you got to be up on. I know not everybody wants to dig in that deep, and not everybody does. So I don't go super deep in the article, but I took each division in the AL and the NL, and I gave you a hitter and a pitcher that could either win a job in spring training, already has a job and just kind of has it there to lose in spring training, or somebody you could see up sooner rather than later that can help you out a little bit. Because I know, it's along the same lines sometimes, as far as, when we look at the rookies in football, the rookies in baseball can be the same way, and they can get sent back down and get called back up. But then you can have guys where they come up like Cody Bellinger, like the Reese Hoskins of the world, that just come up and just mash from the get-go, and they take you to titles. And so hopefully I might have captured a couple of those guys for you, but I didn't go ultra deep on that article. But I think it'll be helpful as far as especially yearly players, some guys that could potentially be household names this season, but could already have jobs when spring training camp breaks and we're ready for the regular season as well.
Right, and those are so huge when you get those kind of guys in the late rounds that can really, pull your team from maybe a rough April into being right there in first place in June. And so Ron will be doing that. He'll also will be doing his weekly prospects during the year, so he'll keep you up to date on the guys that are coming up that could help your team as well. So Ron's definitely one of the best at putting that out there. We'll have Colby Conaway with his closer report right now. We got some draft strategies by our man Matthew Sells. He's doing a great job with that. And, of course, if you're an NBA guy and a DFS guy, you can follow Kaz Kalita and Adam Sutton putting out their DFS numbers every day. I've been winning money. I know nothing about the NBA. I think I could actually name 10 players off the top of my head in the pros. That's amazing. And so I've been winning some money.
Ones that actually play in this era too, not 80s guys either.
Yeah, no, I can name a ton of those guys. I can name all of those guys.
Absolutely.
I won $200 one day in one of the big GPPs. I think I placed like 26 out of like thousands of people, which I felt like I should have won more money, but $200 doesn't suck. And, I've had some other good scenarios, so I'm still way ahead money wise, and kind of picking and choosing what I do, and but these guys are putting out some great information. So if you haven't had a chance to subscribe, folks, it is dirt cheap. I mean, it's not that their value or the value is unbelievable. And when I talk about great value, this is great value. $4.99 for a month. That is like a third of most people's prices out there. And these guys are helping me win, and I know very little about the NBA. So if they can help me win, they can certainly help you win. So make sure you go out there and subscribe on the DFS plan. Try it out for a week. It's only $1.99, $2. It's less than a cup of coffee. Heck, if you go to Starbucks, you can get a whole month for a cup of coffee. So go out there, try them out for a month, and win some money. I'm sure it'll pay you back without a question. So make sure you do that as well. Fantasy football wise, of course, I just put out the rookies versus consistency article. That's an annual affair, so you can kind of go and look at that. Ron, I know you saw it. We jumped up a whole percentage point from less than 8% going into last year up to now just under 9% rookies who are earning 60% in their first year. Obviously, last year the running backs did a great job. 4 of them earning over 60%. And in both cases, I did not include Deshaun Watson and I did not include Dalvin Cook because they only played in 4 or 7 games. I did not allow them to qualify because that isn't fair. But could have been even better if both those guys played all year. But, still, rookies are a risk, but there's certainly rookies now that are coming in and making their effects known. There's going to be a lot of top quarterbacks, a lot of running backs coming in this year draft-wise. So, I think we'll definitely talk about them. I know our boy Josh Brickner is going to take a look at them and see which ones have the best case scenario coming in to the teams they're going to be coming into. We know anybody who gets drafted by the Browns will suck, so we'll just leave that at will because that's the Browns. But there's going to be a lot of good players coming out. Any particular players you see coming out that if they got on the right team, and maybe you even tell me what team you think that'll be that could have some fantasy impact?
I think, and this is part of me kind of going with, my fandom as opposed to what makes sense and what's common sense. But I think Saquon Barkley is a guy that you got to look at that could step in and just be ready to be consistent and just put up some points. And, my Colts pick at number 3. And so I would love to see them get him there just for the fun aspect of it, for the fan aspect of it. But, when I bring my common sense, logical thinking into it, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to go with him there. But I think that, you got a guy like Frank Gore there who Frank Gore does it, year in and year out. I mean, when you do yourself a favor and look up where he's at on the all-time rushing list and tell Frank Gore doesn't deserve all the respect in the world for what he does, man. He's a rock. But, he's not getting any younger. He could use a little bit of help. I like Marlon Mack, but I don't think Marlon Mack is an every down guy. I think Barkley is, and I'd love to see him in that Colts blue, but I don't know if it's going to happen. Just kind of depends on where they go. So,
I've heard,
no doubt.
Yeah, I've heard the Browns taking him at number 1, which could be a thing. A lot of it's going to depend, obviously, what happens with Kirk Cousins if the Browns, for some chance in heaven that he would come to Cleveland. Then they might take Barkley at number 1. That would make more sense then. If they don't get a good quarterback in the offseason, then, I could see them probably taking a quarterback and then thinking they might get Barkley at 4. But I agree with you. I think the Colts would make perfect sense with him at 3. Gore will play one more season. Barkley comes in and, they kind of share and then, Gore can run off can ride off into the sunset, and I'll be driving him in 5 years in Canton because he certainly deserves to be there. He's had a great career. But, that's a good pick, and I certainly agree with that one 100%. So, again, those articles are coming up. I'll be, I'm working on the 2018 Fantasy Football Consistency Guide. My goal is still June 1st. Maybe sooner, but we're going to say June 1st for now. I've got a lot of stuff done already. Free agency will be coming on March 14th, so that'll obviously change a lot of things, and that's when I'll probably start putting a lot of the stuff together and looking forward to getting that out there for you. So once again, Ron, thanks for being a part of tonight's show for the Consistency Awards for wide receivers. Any last words before we ride off?
No, man, just appreciate you having me. Always a good time, and looking forward to doing tight ends coming up.
Yeah, next week we'll be giving out the awards for tight ends, and in a few weeks we're going to talk about some new consistency analytics. One's called X consistency, and one is called total consistency value. Going to be exciting stuff. Ron's already looked at a little bit of the numbers I put together and some of the new ways to look at consistency and how to kind of separate the players a little bit better. So once again, those will be coming up here in a few weeks. So once again, for Ron Rigney, I'm Bob Lung here at the Fantasy Football Consistency Hour, and we will see you guys next week. Take care. God bless.